underrepresented minority. This is a term that we use in, especially in the STEM or biological, science, technology, engineering, and math fields, to describe individuals from racial and ethnic groups that have been shown by the National Science Foundation to be underrepresented in health-related sciences on a national basis. And so that includes Blacks or African Americans, Hispanics or Latinos, American Indians or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders. And so the topic that I want to discuss here is the oncology workforce, and also the biological, medical, and research workforce. So we know that Black people comprise about 13% of the US population. And that number decreases when you look at recent college graduates and recent medical school applicants, medical school graduates. The percent of medical school graduates that go on to be residency is actually the same. And the percent of those residents who go on to become oncology fellows and those that go on to become oncology. And so there's a decrease in the frequency of African Americans at each one of these stages. We think of this in the area of workforce diversity and development as a pipeline. I will mention that we're thinking about this in current day, but it's important to remember the historical context of African American experiences in this country, because it's a contribution to our current day diversity. And so I just want to remind us that exclusion of African Americans from higher education was standard practice in the United States until fairly recently like the end of the Civil Rights Movement. This is a letter from the Director of Admissions to, at that time, Mr. Marion Gerald Hood, who's now Dr. Marion Gerald Hood, who's an OBGYN who lives in Georgia. But at this time, Mr. Hood was applying for medical school at Emory University, and he was denied admission to medical school. And I want you to just see that second sentence here. I'm sorry that I must write that we are not authorized to consider admission for admission a member of the Negro race. And then they returned his $5 application fee to medical school. So this was common practice. Exclusionary practices prevented African Americans from joining the medical workforce, from obtaining PhDs in science, from performing the research that we're all interested in now and hoping will lead to more and more treatments. And I think when thinking about this exclusionary practice and what has been, I think, a difficult experience for African Americans to date in this country, that I think of Newton's third law of motion, which is a physics principle, and that's for every action in nature, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think that equal and opposite reaction requires us to make that equal and opposite reaction. And there, I think there's a need for innovative, disruptive ideas that can challenge the status quo for workforce diversity with explicitly inclusive policies and intentions. And I'll talk about some of those as I proceed. I mentioned that we think of workforce diversity in terms of a pipeline, that there is a percentage of individuals, and it's really youth in the US population that go on to college, but then those that end up making it to positions in academia or in industry, developing drugs for pancreatic cancer or working in oncology, diminishes over time. And we want to know, where are those leaks happening? Where are people leaving the pipeline? Where are they leaving the workforce? And we know that some of that happens during college, that people leave college. Some of that happens in the process from college to graduate school, and then the next steps in postgraduate training, and then finally leading to small frequencies of Black individuals who enter into faculty positions in our country. So I laid out here for you what a career path for a scientist looks like, and then below it, what a career path for a physician looks like. And so up top, that's the path that I took. First, we start with early education, pre-kindergarten through high school. This is really shaping your education. I'm not going to speak on this, but this is probably the most critical portion of career development is quality education, encouraging and enriching students' minds with excitement towards pursuing some career path. And then students enter into college. And there in college, that's really your first introduction to biomedical research. You may participate in academic year or summer research. Academic year, if the institution that you are attending has the opportunity to provide you with research experiences. Not all colleges have research laboratories where students can conduct independent and innovative research. And so some students rely on summers to acquire that experience. I will note that the next step here in going from college to graduate school, research experiences is one of the most important factors for admission. I sit in admissions in my institution, and your academics, your GPA, your research experiences are critical to you're being admitted to the next step. And at this stage in a scientist's career, you're taking general science coursework, so things like cell biology, organic chemistry. You're not yet specializing in a certain area. Barriers to success here are really barriers to entry. Cost of tuition is expensive. And so if we look at the US News and World Report for number 1 college, all the way down to what's tied for number 49 with 3 other colleges, they're around $53,000 to $64,000 a year. That's a very steep price for, especially for low-income individuals, and that is a barrier to access. Additionally, there can often be lack of academic support systems. That's one reason why students leave the workforce, and there are many other options. This is a very complicated matter. To the right, I have a graphic that explains or demonstrates both the percent of underrepresented minorities that earn bachelor's degrees in sciences in the United States, 18% at 2013, as well as a graphic that demonstrates the number of bachelors earned by individuals of each different race or ethnic group identified here. So you can tell this orange bar of underrepresented minorities, which includes African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. That percent has increased over time. The size of the orange bar has increased over time. So progress is being made. The next step in that career path is admission to graduate school. And so here there's an application process that many schools still require standardized testing. That sometimes can be thought of as a barrier to entry. This is a time in which PhD students do 5 to 6 years of intensive independent academic research. They end up writing a thesis. I actually was looking at my thesis, which I completed 11 years ago in February. I was looking at it recently when talking to a group of undergrads who have interest in attending graduate school. And at this point, students do field-specific coursework. So they're going to specialize and take courses in cancer biology or immunology, and they're going to learn about microbes and viruses. Typically, you'll have one main advisor, but then you might have 3 or 4 other members of an advisement committee. And it's this group of individuals who are responsible for not only supporting you through your graduate training, providing you guidance, but also they make the decision on when you are done. So that 5 to 6 years is actually kind of open-ended. And once you meet the criteria that that committee has set for you, then you can graduate, or they allow you to graduate. At this stage, there's often lower diversity. It's lower amounts of underrepresented minorities that are in graduate school. And so a need for a support system is often common amongst underrepresented minority graduate students. The need to be able to talk to someone that you can identify with, where you can talk about problems that you don't feel comfortable talking about to general public, or to majority population. And this is common. And as you will note, that orange bar is much smaller in this group. So the number of underrepresented minorities who achieve PhDs or awarded PhDs every year has shrunk, and is a smaller proportion. The next step after graduate school, after achieving a PhD, in most cases for doing an academic career, is a postdoctoral fellowship. And so this is something that can be more open-ended. It's typically up to 5 years, although some institutions allow a postdoctoral fellowship to continue perpetually. This is independent research that a PhD now performs in a different research laboratory generally, sometimes on a different research topic. And it provides training towards being able to run your own academic lab. At this point, this is where most people solidify their research topic. And so for finding investigators, early stage investigators who are going to be interested in pancreatic cancer, this is the stage at which that really gets solidified. There are metrics of success in this group. Publications, funding acquisition is really important. And there's also lower diversity here than in graduate school. And I have two graphics below that show the percent of underrepresented residents and fellows in oncology over time, and how that has stayed flatline despite other groups rising in frequency. So for Hispanics, this number has risen and fallen over time. And then the frequency of underrepresented minority postdocs is also very small when compared to non-underrepresented minority. And note, when I say underrepresented minority, I'm talking about the six different groups that I mentioned earlier. And then lastly, the last step after a postdoc is generally that these individuals apply for faculty positions. And faculty has different stages. There's assistant professor, and then associate professor, and then full professor. And here their success metrics are quality scholarship, so publications, acquiring funding, which means grant writing and success on those grants, acquiring those grants, teaching performance, developing a national reputation, and then performing service to your university. And if you look at the graphic to your left, all the way to the left, you'll see that while there's been increases in the numbers of underrepresented minorities over the last, over this decade or so that's presented here, in obtaining a bachelor's degree and obtaining a PhD, and completing a postdoc, there has been flat line increase. There has been no change in the amount of full professor faculty. So at some point in this pipeline, those increased numbers aren't translating to the next level. And at this stage, faculty level, this is where new trainees, the next generation of scientists, are going to be trained. It's also where research will start on new drug development. So faculty start bringing in new ideas, starting clinical trials. As I mentioned, my lab has one currently running, and not making it to that stage, or not making it, or somehow falling out of the pipeline after that stage and not making it to the full professor stage is really a disservice to all of us, because it means that we may lack advances that are that could be potentially effective. Below, I have a graphic that shows the frequency, the percent of faculty by race, junior faculty and senior faculty, and you can see that there's no difference in STEM fields of Black junior faculty and senior faculty. The number is around 3 to 4%, and for non-STEM fields, that's different. So in the biological sciences and in STEM fields, we have some work to do. And then one of those metrics, success measures I mentioned, is funding acquisition. There was a highly cited and important paper in 2011 that reviewed our National Institutes of Health. It reviewed the amounts of funding for for a grant called the R01, which is a grant for independent research scientists, and it's a well-respected grant. The percent of African Americans who receive this award, the probability of receiving this award, is about 12 to 13% lower when compared to other ethnic groups, and that's when controlling for education, institution, research type. And so that suggests that there may be other factors, including bias of the review panels in terms of grant funding. And when these metrics can't be achieved, that limits the transition from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. And so interventions to improve that are necessary. And speaking of interventions, a friend of mine who I went to college with, Kenneth Gibbs, who's now, he now works at the National Institute of General Medical Sciences at the NIH, had published this important paper in 2016. And here, what Kenny did was he went around the country and he talked to faculty, he talked to postdocs, he talked to PhD students, and he also looked at the numbers of PhD graduates from underrepresented minority backgrounds from 1980 to 2013. And he saw that those numbers increased by a factor of 9.3 compared to a 2.3-fold increase in the number of PhD graduates from well-represented groups. However, the number of scientists from underrepresented minority backgrounds hired at the next level as assistant professors in medical school basic science departments was not related to the number of potential candidates. Whereas for well-represented groups, there was a strong correlation between the number of candidates available and those that were hired. And so that suggests that there is there's a barrier here. And what they did was they built and validated a conceptual system dynamics model that posited that there's no hiring discrimination. And they found that without institutional or system level intervention, that faculty diversity in our country would not increase significantly through the year 2080. And so if we want to see huge improvements in this space, in workforce development, workforce diversity, we need to make interventions. And so if the number of faculty positions increase, or there was increased transitioning of underrepresented postdoc candidates onto the market, that would improve faculty diversity before 2080. That suggests that we must be intentional with our mentoring of underrepresented minorities and with our hiring of underrepresented minorities. And so I just want to leave you with a couple strategies to increase workforce diversity, and then I have one plug. So undergraduate research experiences, both summer or academic year for underrepresented minorities, is important. This is one of the most important factors for admission to graduate school. At the university, at my center, our Center for Cellular Immunotherapies, we have a summer program that just started last year, where we have 5 underrepresented minorities in this program working in our labs over the summer. They're receiving training specifically in cancer immunotherapy, with hopes that that will encourage them and spark interest in this field, that they'll continue along that path in graduate school and hopefully continue on to a postdoc and faculty position. I think that culturally sensitive mentoring, such as mentoring circles or pyramids of undergrads, graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and junior faculty is really important. A postdoctoral fellow in my lab started a program here at the University of Pennsylvania called Mentoring Circles. And it's just that. She gets together small groups of undergrads, graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and junior faculty. Each group has this composition, and they're able to mentor each other. And so there's some feedback that happens, and that kind of community is important. Additionally, establishing a community of underrepresented minorities on campus can be achieved through faculty cluster talent hiring. That can be done in areas in which there is absent or not satisfactorily supportive communities. And then funding opportunities for research faculty. So opportunities like the AACR Career Development Award in honor of Congressman John Lewis with the Lustgarten Foundation. That's really important because those earmarked awards help underrepresented minorities achieve those metrics that are necessary for success to move to the next level, given that there are disparities in how other awards are received and how grants are reviewed at least at the governmental level. And lastly, I want to give one shout out. So I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge my undergrad, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the scholarship program that I participated in from 2001 to 2005, the 13th year of that scholarship program. This is a program that was started in 1988 with $5 million of philanthropy from a couple, Robert and Jane Meyerhoff, with the goal was to support African Americans who would work towards obtaining a PhD in STEM fields. The New York Times has recently shown this ad called "The Ripple Effect is Real," and 33 years later, you can see and appreciate the ripple effect of this initial investment. There's 1,600 participants in this program to date, with 1,400 alumni, 300 scholarship participants that are currently in graduate school programs now. UMBC is the #1 undergrad college for African Americans who will later obtain an MD PhD, and it's the #2 undergrad college for African Americans who obtain PhDs in science and engineering. And then I highlighted 3 of my favorite people below. This is Dr. Kinlekia Corbett, who hopefully everyone knows by now. She's had a great year. She is an NIH scientist who's responsible for the development of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. Her work in coronavirus vaccines has definitely predated this pandemic, but it's important to see that her contributions have made a significant impact in our recovery from the pandemic. She will soon become an assistant professor at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, so very excited for her. The next, my frat brother, Kafi Draza, who, like we do, is in this picture having a conversation with the former president. At this time, he was Barack Obama was president. Duke is an associate. Kafi Draza is an associate professor of psychiatry at Duke University School of Medicine. And lastly, my really good friend, Kyla McMullen, who is an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Florida. She was the first Black woman to receive a PhD in computer science from the University of Michigan. These are 3 that I highlighted because they're some of my favorite people. But this program has been highly successful, and I think that ripple effect that I've discussed continues. I know in my own lab, I have had a high frequency of underrepresented minorities who come to my lab, who would like to work in my lab to be trained. And I think that investment in training a very diverse workforce is something that this program initiated and helps to perpetuate.